He built his image as the perfect father, the loyal husband, the man who could charm anyone. But when the truth came out, it wasn't the fans or the tabloids that exposed him. It was his own children. Martell Holt always thought he could bend reality in his favor. For years, he relied on charm, a polished appearance, and that trademark smile to sell the image of a devoted father and misunderstood husband. But charisma only stretches so far before the truth demands proof. Behind the curated family snapshots and vague Instagram musings, the cracks deepened. His children noticed long before the outside world caught on. That's what he failed to consider. Kids don't keep up a facade for long, especially when they're living through the chaos day after day. They know who actually shows up at bedtime and who disappears once the spotlight fades. It wasn't a single explosive moment that unraveled Martell Holt's carefully polished story. It was the slow, grinding weight of repeated failures stacking one on top of the other. Each small choice, each ignored obligation, each sidestep of accountability acted like a crack in the foundation. At first, the breaks weren't visible to the public eye, but cracks don't stay hidden forever. With time, they spread until even the strongest facade can no longer hold. The failures themselves weren't mysterious or unavoidable. They were clear, outlined by the court in black and white. Therapy sessions he was ordered to attend went unfulfilled, sometimes missed outright, sometimes brushed off as if they were inconveniences unworthy of his time. Parenting evaluations that might have offered insight into his strengths and weaknesses as a father were dismissed, delayed, or outright dodged. Deadlines came and went, with excuses and deflections trailing behind him. It wasn't chaos or bad luck. It was intentional. It was pride. The irony is that the court had provided him with a map back to credibility. The instructions weren't ambiguous. They were the very steps that could have proven stability and restored confidence in his role as a father. Yet Martell interpreted compliance not as a path forward, but as submission. To him, following the court's structure seemed like weakness, as though meeting those requirements meant admitting defeat. In his eyes, real strength meant bending the narrative to his will, not bowing to it. For more than 2 years, he walked this path of resistance. 2 years in which he could have shifted the trajectory of his relationship with his children. 2 years in which he might have built a track record of responsibility. Instead, he rejected the quiet, disciplined work that courts value and chose a louder battlefield: social media. There, he could posture, perform, and rally support with quick posts and carefully staged images. There, likes and comments felt like validation, far more gratifying than the slow, quiet work of proving reliability in therapy rooms or court-ordered evaluations. In the beginning, people wanted to believe him. There's always an allure to the underdog narrative, especially when it centers on a father claiming to fight against a system that feels inherently stacked against men. His story tapped into cultural conversations about custody battles, parental rights, and the complexities of divorce. To many outsiders, he looked like a man trying to cling to his children while being pushed aside. For a while, that storyline held. But the truth about patterns is that they always reveal themselves. Words can paint pictures, but behavior tells the story. And Martell's behavior told a very different tale than the one he was selling. Over time, even casual observers started noticing the inconsistencies. Fans began comparing how he treated his child with Arian Curry to how he engaged with the children he shared with Melody. The difference was glaring. With Arian's child, Martell played the role of the doting, involved father for all the world to see. Social media became his stage photos, videos, and posts showcasing himself as present, affectionate, and engaged. It was a performance of fatherhood, curated for visibility. But when it came to Melody's children, the performance evaporated. Suddenly, privacy became his defense, a shield to explain the lack of public involvement. What was presented as protection looked more like absence. That double standard unsettled those who were paying attention. The contrast spoke louder than his captions ever could. It wasn't just about the children themselves. It was about credibility. If Martell truly believed in openness and involvement, why was it selectively displayed? Why did one child receive public acknowledgement and the others receive excuses cloaked in claims of discretion? The inconsistency chipped away at the image he had tried so carefully to construct. And then there was Melody, the quiet counterpoint to his chaos. While Martell resisted court orders, Melody complied. Where he dodged therapy, she showed up. Where he bristled at evaluations, she embraced them. Where he sought validation through likes and attention, she sought stability through structure. She wasn't perfect, but she was consistent, and in custody disputes, consistency weighs heavily. The juxtaposition between them became unavoidable. His resistance only highlighted her reliability. The longer this went on, the clearer it became that Martell's struggles weren't the result of an unfair system, they were the result of his own choices. The narrative of a father unjustly kept from his children began to crumble under the weight of repeated defiance. Fans who once defended him found themselves questioning his actions. And once the questioning began, the shift in perception accelerated. Social media, which had once been his weapon, slowly turned against him. The same platforms where he had crafted his image now became archives of contradictions. Supportive comments dwindled, replaced with criticism and skepticism. People began to connect the dots. The missed court dates, the ignored requirements, the inconsistencies between what he preached and what he practiced. Even those who had once cheered for him as an underdog started to see the pattern of self-sabotage. What Martell didn't account for was the fact that children, especially his own, saw the truth long before the public did. Kids don't live in captions or carefully edited posts. They live in the day-to-day reality of who shows up and who doesn't. They remember who tucks them in, who listens to their fears, who helps with homework, who makes the effort to be present when the cameras are off. No amount of online performance could erase what they experienced firsthand. For them, the unraveling didn't come from public scandals or court documents. It came from the quiet accumulation of disappointments. A missed visit here, an excuse there, promises The storm wasn't theoretical, it was their daily life. And children, even when they can't articulate it fully, know when something isn't right. They know when love is steady and when it's conditional. They know when they're being used as pawns in battles that have nothing to do with them. This was the part Martell never anticipated. He assumed the audience he needed to convince was the public, the fans, the judge. But the real audience was his children, and they were not swayed by suits, smiles, or captions. They were swayed by actions. And actions steady, visible, reliable actions were the very thing he failed to deliver. The unraveling of Martell Holt's story was not a dramatic implosion, but a slow, grinding erosion. Every missed therapy session, every skipped evaluation, every ignored deadline was a wave against his carefully built sick. Piece by piece, it crumbled until the structure no longer resembled the strong, devoted father he claimed to be. By the time fans and the public fully recognized the pattern, his children already knew. They had lived it, and, in the end, their quiet truths carried more weight than his loudest defenses. No courtroom could erase that. No Instagram caption could rewrite it. The father they saw online wasn't the one they knew in real life. And that, more than any court ruling or public criticism, was the verdict that would follow him. When it came to his daughter with Ariane Curry, Martell presented himself as the picture of fatherhood, posting photos, sharing moments, and broadcasting presence like a man eager to prove a point. But with the children he shared with Melody Cherie, suddenly the story changed. Privacy became his shield, a selective standard that didn't sit well with those watching closely. Melody, by contrast, had no interest in optics. She followed every directive the court gave her: therapy sessions, evaluations, structured. While Martell spun narratives, Melody built consistency. That difference became impossible to ignore. People began asking why a man who claimed family was his highest value couldn't do the bare minimum to demonstrate it. The turning point came with a conviction that stripped away the misunderstood dad acta, domestic violence case. This wasn't gossip or speculation, it was a guilty plea. Martell tried to delay the fallout with appeals, but by August he found himself entering a second guilty plea. The stain was permanent, something no Instagram caption or carefully staged interview could wash away. Judges don't care about polished gym selfies or rehearsed speeches. They care about behavior, and his record showed repeated defiance and refusal to change. Meanwhile, Melody's path looked different. Not flawless, but steady. She expanded her brand, nurtured her music, grew her businesses, and raised 4 children, all with a quiet determination that spoke louder than Martell's theatrics. Fans began to view her not just as a survivor of chaos, but as someone who actively chose peace. She didn't need to attack him online or demand sympathy. Her stability became her story. And in contrast, Martell's unraveling became his as the children grew older. Their loyalty shifted in subtle but undeniable ways. Kids see everything: who shows up for birthdays, who attends recitals, who listens to their fears in the quiet moments before bed. The truths they whispered to trusted family and friends carried more weight than any of Martell's public statements. They weren't aligning with him the way he expected. And that silent rejection cut deeper than any legal defeat. For a man who built his identity around being the ultimate family man, watching his children redefine that truth was devastating. Martell's empire didn't collapse in one dramatic blow. It eroded slowly, like waves chipping away at a sandcastle. Every ignored order, every performative social media post, every half-hearted attempt at making things right pushed him further into quicksand. To outsiders, it may have looked like a father fighting against impossible odds, but those who paid closer attention saw something different. A man addicted to control, terrified of admitting that he'd already lost it. The financial toll told its own story. Court fees piled up, child support obligations never went away, and the costs of appeals stacked on top of everything else. Thousands ballooned into tens of thousands, draining accounts faster than he could refill them with reality TV appearances or shaky business ventures. The businessman persona, once a point of pride, began to look more like smoke and mirrors. Behind the curtain, creditors circled, and his foundation grew weaker by the day. Melody, on the other hand, moved steadily. She didn't flaunt her progress with bravado. She built brick by brick, her music, her businesses, her home life. The contrast was glaring, and fans took notice. They admired her resilience, not because she was perfect, but because she proved progress could happen without constant chaos. That same contrast seeped into the cast. Dynamics of love and marriage. Huntsville. Co-stars who once tread lightly around Martell no longer felt compelled to do so. Morris and Kimmy showed open frustration. Wanda's blunt remarks cut closer to truth than ever. Even Marcel Scott, usually quick to spar, made it clear Martell's drama had lost its entertainment value. When reality TV peers people who thrive on conflict grow weary of your antics, the showman act is over. But the deepest wound wasn't in what fans or castmates were saying. It was in the quiet shift of his children. Kids age, and with age comes clarity. They saw who made excuses and who followed through. They recognized the difference between one parent constantly in courtrooms and another building consistency at home. That awareness bred small acts of resistance pulling back. Quiet remarks, honest confessions shared in trusted spaces. These weren't loud betrayals. They were quiet heartbreaks that revealed where their trust really lived. By the time August 2025 brought that second guilty plea, Martell's story was no longer his to control. Judges had hard evidence. Lawyers had a trail of defiance. The public had receipts. And looming in October was the custody trial that could define the rest of his life. For Martell, the battle was no longer just about custody. It was about pride, image, and the very identity he had clung to for years. But courts don't weigh pride. They weigh facts, behavior, and history. And Martell's history was now written in defiance, manipulation, and violence confirmed by his own guilty pleas. The weight of Martell Holt's choices had crystallized into a moment no charm could spin away. October 15th was more than a date on the calendar. It was a reckoning. Custody battles are never simple, but this one wasn't about holiday schedules or splitting bills. It was about credibility, consistency, trust. Judges don't make decisions based on charisma or sweeping declarations of love. They study patterns. And Martell's pattern was impossible to ignore: resistance, deflection, and refusal to change. The evidence was stacked against him: 2 domestic violence guilty pleas, repeated violations of court orders, and a trail of pointless appeals that drained time and money without shifting the outcome. On paper, the picture was damning. In person, it was worse. The proud father persona had eroded into something darker, a man who weaponized the court system, using it as leverage to pull Melody back into chaos every time she tried to move forward. To a judge, that wasn't persistence. It was abuse. The consequences weren't minor. Martell risked losing regular visitation, facing restrictions, perhaps even supervised time with his children. Parenting classes, therapy, and court oversight all hung in the balance. For a man obsessed with control and image, the thought of being monitored during fatherhood was more than a legal penalty. It was personal humiliation. The strong present dad narrative he clung to online was slipping out of his hands. Melody, on the other hand, didn't need theatrics. She complied with every order, avoided public explosions, and built a home grounded in stability. Her lawyers carried facts, not spin. The contrast was glaring. Her world offered structure and peace, while Martell's revolved around chaos and litigation. Judges favor the parent who can provide consistency. Melody embodied it. Outside the courtroom, the same shift played out. Once sympathetic fans had grown weary. The comment sections that once rallied behind him now filled with skepticism and criticism. Business connections quietly pulled back, unwilling to attach themselves to a brand unraveling in scandal. On live streams, Martell's veneer cracked anger flared. Captions painted him as the victim, and his interactions revealed denial rather than accountability. What once looked like strategy now read as fear. Fear of irrelevance, fear of consequences, fear of being left behind. For the children, though this was more than legal drama, they had lived the reality years of tension, courtrooms, and feeling like pawns in their father's fight for control. Emotional wounds aren't erased by rulings. Even if Melody walked away with full custody, the damage to trust was already written in their quiet resistance. In the way they pulled back, in the truths they carried silently. The cruelest irony was that Martell once had a clear path to redemption. The opportunities weren't abstract, they were laid in front of him, step by step. Had he approached therapy with sincerity instead of resistance, had he viewed the court's requirements not as punishments but as lifelines, he might have reshaped the narrative entirely. Growth was within reach. He could have shown his children, the court, and even himself that he was willing to evolve. He might have stood shoulder to shoulder with Melody, not as an adversary locked in endless battles, but as a partner in the shared responsibility of parenting. But Martell didn't choose that road. Again and again, he placed pride above peace. He prioritized control over care. He chased the mirage of image over the substance of growth. In doing so, he didn't just sabotage his chances in court, he sabotaged the very identity he had built his life around. For years, Martell's story was that of the family man, the devoted father who would do anything for his children. It was the image he projected in interviews, on television, and across social media. It was the persona he clung to, the role he wanted others to believe, defined him. But identities are not sustained by words or curated posts. They're sustained by patterns. By the daily choices that either affirm or contradict the story you tell about yourself. By the time the custody trial loomed, the cracks in Martell's self-image had widened into chasms. The official court decision would be handed down in black and white, signed and sealed, but the deeper verdict had already been written in the hearts of those closest to him. His children had watched, absorbed, and remembered. Melody had adapted, rebuilt, and moved forward. The public, once sympathetic, had shifted. Even his business connections had distanced themselves. What he was truly losing wasn't just custody, was the illusion of control, the carefully guarded narrative of being the heroic father fighting for his kids. That story no longer matched reality. And when a man's identity is tied so tightly to an image, watching it collapse can feel more devastating than any legal ruling. Because this wasn't just about losing time with his children. It was about losing the version of himself he believed in. Martell had told himself he was strong, misunderstood, resilient. He had convinced himself that bending the narrative was the same as living it, but the truth caught up, as it always does. The story he believed about himself, and the story everyone else saw no longer aligned, and that dissonance is a punishment no judge can hand down, no lawyer can negotiate it away, no Instagram post can cover it with filters or motivational quotes. It is the slow, unrelenting ache of realizing that the identity you spent years projecting was never real enough to withstand scrutiny. The court's ink would dry on the paperwork, setting custody arrangements into law, but the verdict that mattered most had been delivered in silence through children who no longer looked at him the same way, through fans who stopped defending him, through opportunities that slipped away one by one. Martell Holt wasn't simply losing a legal battle, he was watching the collapse of the story he told himself about who he was. And that loss, heavier than any courtroom judgment, would be the one he carried long after the trial was over.